Good afternoon. Is my microphone working? We're all good? All right. Great pleasure to be here at my first Awake meeting. Thank you for inviting me, Adam. Wonderful venue. Great audience, very stimulating. In fact, I would say this healthcare conference has been the most informative, educational, and exciting event I've ever attended in my career. It was all organized. And ironically, it was organized by a bunch of sleepy people. Go figure. Sleepy, but very motivated. I would not be here, I think literally would not be here or even alive, but for this gentleman right here pictured beside me that I'm honored to stand beside just his photograph. And before I attempt to do the impossible, summarize what we've covered today, and I was very attentive because I knew I had to do this. I have to just give you a little bit of background on me because it brings in Dr. Guilleminault, brings in Dr. Casey Lee, Dr. Stacy Kuo. I was involved with all those folks, and that's how I met Adam ultimately. About 10 years ago, I was suffering a cognitive decline, about maybe 15 years ago. And it was very insidious. It's like if you got, let's say, 1% less smart every month, would you notice it? And it kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's sort of the nature of this disease, sleep-breathing disorders. Just use the term sleep-breathing disorders. And it just gets very insidiously worse. And you don't really recognize it until you reach some sort of breaking point or you pass some sort of threshold. And mine was I was getting lost in my neighborhood. I couldn't remember people's names that I would meet. I would speak to someone and 5 seconds later forget their name. My attention was dropping. It got so bad I became suicidal. I didn't attempt suicide, but I thought about it a lot. And I knew there was a problem. I was waking up not well rested, non-restorative sleep is the term we use. And I'd wake up and I'd feel worse than when I went to bed, which then causes insomnia because the bed becomes your enemy. And so insomnia is sort of the main thing that people claim with early on, I believe. And we need to be attacking that early as well. Once clinicians hear that a patient has difficulty sleeping, falling asleep or staying asleep, or getting to bed late, that should trigger an investigation for a sleep-breathing disorder or other sleep disorders. But I got to the point where I was suicidal. I had 2 sleep studies done within about 2 years locally. One at a major university medical center. I'm in South Carolina. I'm not going to mention any names. And in both cases, they said I was essentially normal. The first case, they said I was completely normal. The second case, they said minimal, maybe your AHI is around 4. We'll try you on a pressure of 5 on CPAP. And that made me worse, even though I tried it diligently for several months. I figured, I guess I don't have a sleep disorder. And I continued to deteriorate. I developed chaired the committee that developed the national MRI standards for the American College of Radiology, the MRI accreditation standards. And at the conclusion, once we finished that project, I had a 3-year appointment as chairman. After we completed that project in year 2, I resigned because I knew I just could not cope with my cognitive issues. I was struggling just with daily living activities. It was horrible. It was really horrible. I broke down in the shower crying. And the next day, I said, I'm going to find the best sleep medicine facility in the world. And that led me to this clinic and this gentleman right here. And when I saw him in the clinic, he walked in. Remember, opened the door, he walked in. Behind him were a bunch of fellows and residents and what have you. And he said, Dr. Borelli, open your mouth. And he shined a flashlight into my mouth. And he took 2 steps back and he shook his head and he said, Dr. Borelli, you've had sleep apnea your entire life. And I recall when I was age 10, I had a blood pressure of 150/100 and I was hospitalized to find the source of that. The pediatric cardiologist told my parents I would not live past the age of 21. They told me that, thinking that I could handle it, and I did. I was like, I was invincible at age 10. And so ironically, about that same time, 1972, CG wrote his first paper, which was the linkage of childhood hypertension to sleep apnea, which is somewhat ironic. But it took me about a year to get comfortable using CPAP. I was usually placed on a straight pressure, a continuous pressure, CPAP, right? And it felt like I was breathing into a balloon when I'd exhale, and it was intolerable for me. And I eventually switched to BiPAP, and I switched to different interfaces. I started using Afrin in my nose to clear up my nasal passages. I know some allergists and ENT doctors said don't do that. I've been doing Afrin in both nostrils once a night for 10 years. It hasn't given me any problems at all. I get a little stuffy in the evening beforehand, but that was really a breakthrough for me. And I'm on BiPAP, and I look at the data on the machine, what have you, with the Sleepyhead app that was mentioned by Dr. Stein, I believe. Since it took me a year, that motivated me to help people become compliant with CPAP. So I went to Philips Respironics. I had a friend who knew the senior people there, and I met with the CEO of the company, and I convinced them to develop an app to help to coach people to become compliant on CPAP. It was the first app they ever developed. I think they budgeted $7 million for it, and they ended up spending $14 million. It's now called Dream Mapper, not Sleep Mapper, Dream Mapper. And it met a lot of the goals I talked about, but not all of them. But it's still, I think it's benefited a lot of people. And then ultimately, I met Adam, and we worked together on PCORI, and then Apple's research kit came out and said, hey, Apple's done all the heavy lifting on collecting patient data and consenting. Let's do this on our own. And we then built this app with Carl Stepnowski, and it became the Sleep Health app. And all that was all volunteer work, and I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm very happy to be here before you and have the opportunity to speak to you. And I think this is a great meeting. I think we're going to have a bigger one next year. I'm definitely going to plan to attend that. Extremely valuable. There's so much to learn. It's such a complex issue. It affects so many more people that we've diagnosed, terribly underdiagnosed. So many stereotypes that are wrong, overweight, middle-aged males. This affects young people, and we need to be intervening much earlier. But enough about my story. Let's go on to the summary. And this is going to be very brief, and I picked up a few little notes and a few little things, some sort of hacks, maybe as you'd call them, as millennials might call them, that I've learned over the years that I'll share with you, rightly or wrongly. I'm a medical doctor, but this is not medical advice. This is just my suggestions to you. Also, I want to disclose, I was recently named medical director of Bleep, and I'm an investor in Snap CPAP LLC that make an interface that attaches to your nose adhesively rather than through straps. And of course, I think it's great, but I'm not here to talk about that. We started out with Dr. Sullivan, and I think who was formerly at Stanford, and she had several panelists, and they were talking about these overlapping issues. Asthma, chronic pain, anxiety, depression. There are all these comorbid conditions, and I think, as Adam said earlier, this is where patients frequently contact the healthcare system initially, is with a comorbid condition. One we didn't hear today was atrial fibrillation. I think virtually all atrial fibrillation is caused by sleep apnea, virtually all of it, and most cardiologists don't even check for it. So it's just an aside. There's no question that there are so many. Sleep affects everything. It affects every single cell. I think someone won the Nobel Prize recently for determining that there is a circadian clock in every living cell in your body. It has to do with enzyme production. Enzyme that produces a protein that leaves the cell and it comes back in just a little over 24 hours, like 24 hours and 10 minutes. And the master clock in the hypothalamus has a 24-hour cycle to it. So it's like the master clock, but every cell in your body is expecting to rest. And that's why all these other comorbid conditions are related to sleep. Because if your GI tract doesn't sleep, you have irritable bowel syndrome. I'm oversimplifying, right? But if your brain doesn't sleep, toxins build up that cause Alzheimer's disease. And we know now that the brain cells shrink 40% in deep stages of sleep, which is extraordinary. And why do they shrink 40%? It allows room between them for them to remove the toxins. And we also found out about 5 years ago, independently in Europe and the United States, 2 research teams found a lymphatic pathway in the brain that allows the toxins to be removed. All your anatomy textbooks up until about 5 years ago showed lymphatics stopping here, none up here. And now we know they're there. Amazing, amazing. I personally believe, this is, you don't have to take this home, but I believe the #1 reason we do sleep is to allow the brain to remove toxins. That's the main reason it developed evolutionarily. Because think about it, when you're asleep, you're at risk for attack by a predator. And so we sleep because we absolutely have to, right? As we're putting ourselves at huge risk. So we sleep for a reason. I think that's the #1 reason why it developed evolutionarily. That's just my own personal theory. And I think that's why we see such a huge link between Alzheimer's disease and sleep disorders. So there's all these comorbid conditions, and they're not being addressed properly. We don't have the resources or awareness to do it right now. And that's why we're here, is to hopefully improve both of those, create greater awareness, both organically from patients, but also among institutions and among corporations that are involved. And I think with the model we have is what they have at Stanford, and the interdisciplinary group that they have at Stanford is a model that we should try to reproduce nationwide, internationally. We had the team sport meeting with Dr. Kuo, and by the way, Dr. Kuo's clinic, if you have a chance to go to see Dr. Kuo's clinic, it's the most amazing healthcare clinic I've ever seen in my life. And I told her that today. I said, oh my God, this is like incredible. It's like the healthcare clinic that Steve Jobs would have designed. Well, it turns out Steve Jobs and his family were patients of hers. But it is really, it's amazing. And she's an amazing lady, and wonderful to have her here today with us. And they talked about how they coordinated all their disciplines with allergy, with insomnia, with the myofascial exercises, the tongue exercises to help the tongue become better positioned in the mouth during sleep. Again, it's very complex, and people presenting with initial sleep disorders or other comorbid disorders, when they get into the healthcare system, we need to evaluate all those areas to optimize their care, right? We heard a really compelling research from Dr. Gardner, I believe. Yeah, and I spoke with him afterwards. I think there's a lot of opportunity there because these devices that we're using late in the hours, he showed roughly something like a 10-fold increased risk of suicide between the hours of like midnight and 3 a.m., which is really extraordinary to see that. And that's something we can target. And a lot of times, especially younger people that are committing suicide, they're probably doing something on one of their phones, and I think we possibly could capture some data. Maybe they're typing in an anxious way, or something we can pick up by the interaction with these devices. And I've spoken to him about maybe working with Apple and doing something there with their new sort of generalized research kit app that they announced at the big announcement a couple weeks ago. But I think that's, there's an opportunity potentially to intervene there. And then we heard about, the challenge of patient-gathered healthcare data. We have healthcare data in disparate sources all over the world and stored differently. And we see, as I mentioned earlier, Apple's made an effort, probably other companies have made an effort to sort of standardize how we store this data and how we can access it. And that's going to be a key to where we get, as Will was mentioning, have machine learning look at these huge, vast amounts of data and pour through it to find relationships between multiple factors that a human being could almost never find or may take years to find. I think that's going to be a key to maybe finding a cure to this condition. And I think technology is obviously going to be the answer, but without the awareness, we're not going to get the technology or the resources to go after it. And I just have a few little, things I wanted to mention, if given the opportunity, the things that I've learned over time that kind of surprised me. I developed arrhythmias on high levels of CPAP, which I suffered about 30,000 premature atrial contractions, similar to atrial fibrillation, but not atrial fibrillation. And my pressure was very high, 20/15. And I went to Mayo Clinic, I went to Stanford, I went to 3 cardiologists. None of them could figure out what was wrong. They want to put me on drugs, what have you. One night I lowered my pressure by 5, and the next morning I woke up in normal sinus rhythm. So no question, the increased pressure, which was preventing filling of my cardiac atria. If your chest pressure is high, the blood flowing into your chest is going to be lowered, so it was actually changing the shape of my atria, which was triggering the arrhythmias. That's my theory. But no one's been able to explain it, but no question was related to the pressure. So if anyone's on high pressure and they get arrhythmias, you may look at maybe lowering your pressure or speaking to your physician about that. And no one, even Dr. Guilleminault, didn't understand that, which is kind of interesting. I've also found that bi-level is a huge improvement over CPAP. And if anyone's struggling with CPAP and you're not on bi-level is a huge improvement because it allows you to exhale comfortably, right? I also found, again, I mentioned earlier, using Afrin to open my nasal passages every night, just once a day, no more than once a day. You will get a little rebound stuffiness the next day. Some people, it does affect more than that. For me, I can use it. And if you're having any problems with feeling that you're congested, you may want to give that a try. Maybe try it for a little while, but you will become addicted to it because you will get, if you stop it, you'll start getting stuffy and stuffy. So it's kind of like a commitment. And again, I'm not recommending that, just maybe suggest you try it. What else? I also found that I wake up frequently after about 4 or 5 hours. And I found a miracle drug. I just read about it recently, and it's been used for a while. It's called doxepin. You can get it in a liquid form, in generic. It's very inexpensive, and you take about 5 milligrams, or either 1 or 5 milligrams, equally effective to help you stay asleep. And that, to me, that's something I discovered within the last 6 months. It's been very helpful for me if you wake up after a short period of time. That's a form of insomnia. It's a type of insomnia where you wake up too soon. I have both sleep onset and sleep maintenance insomnia, or did. And that really helped me. And if you're having trouble with sleep maintenance, meaning staying asleep, talk to your doctor about trying some doxepin. It's used in a dose like 1/20th you would use for depression. What else? I think if there's anything I'd like to communicate to all physicians around the world, if anyone's listening here, people that have insomnia most likely have an underlying sleep breathing disorder. Barry Krakow has studied over 12 years of data, thousands of patients. 90% of patients presenting with insomnia have a sleep breathing disorder. And the last thing that doctors do is send them for a sleep study. They send them for cognitive behavioral therapy, which, yes, has a role, but it's not the cure. You need to open up the airway before any of the other cures are going to work. And that is so important. Insomnia indicates a breathing disorder, most likely, 90% of the time. Please get a sleep study. If you have any issues, or any of your friends, relatives, neighbors that has any difficulties with sleep, falling asleep, staying asleep, the first thing they should do is get a sleep study. And there's a good alternative. Sleep studies are expensive. This is one of the challenges. Sleep studies cost several $1,000s. But there's a company called Itamar. They make a device called WatchPat. I have no involvement whatsoever with the company. I own one of these devices because I use it for friends and family, which I test for free and treat for free, because I'm not a sleep medicine doctor. I'm an MRI doctor. And WatchPat, you just wear it on your wrist, and there's a little probe that goes on your finger. It looks at peripheral arterial tone. So every time you struggle to breathe, your body goes, oh my God, I'm being waterboarded. And like literally, you're struggling to breathe, and it's like a drowning type of mechanism, and your body constricts the peripheral arteries because it thinks you're under attack. So if you're being attacked by an animal, you might lose a limb. Well, it's a good idea not to have your blood in that limb. So that's your natural mechanism, is to shunt the blood towards your torso and brain where you need it. And so that device is extremely sensitive, extremely accurate. And I may alienate a few people here, but I would say it's probably better than most sleep labs at detecting sleep disorder breathing. As I've seen, because there's a huge variation in quality. And also, we also heard about differences in interpretation. You could take 2 sleep studies and have them interpreting and get 2 different results, 2 different AHIs. There's no such thing as your AHI. It varies by day, it varies by clinic, it varies by criteria. What else? Anything else? Adam, anything else that you know that I like to talk about that I may have missed? UARS, okay. So, UARS, upper airway resistance syndrome, okay? So it's a sleep breathing disorder, but instead of sleep apnea where you breathe, 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 stop, and then you get aroused, and then you breathe, breathe, breathe. That's like conventional sleep apnea, right? And nothing's black and white. Everything's all mixed together. Upper airway resistance syndrome is like breathing through a tiny straw, like a stirring straw. With every breath, you're struggling, and your body recognizes that struggle. The tension in the muscles is recognized by your brain. It knows you're struggling to breathe. It's not a good state to be in, and you're in that all night. It's like being waterboarded throughout the night. And I personally believe that has more effects systematically than sleep apnea, and that's why it presents earlier. It presents in younger people, because it affects your whole system, because you're triggering the fight or flight throughout the night. And you're releasing cortisol, which causes you to store fat and become obese. So I think people that are obese and have sleep apnea became obese because of a sleep breathing disorder, and often upper airway resistance syndrome. And upper airway resistance syndrome was discovered by this man right here and described by him, but it's not as well recognized or accepted in the healthcare community. This guy was right. Trust me, this guy was right. And the reason it's not diagnosed is because it's much harder to diagnose it, because you have to spend a lot more time looking at the electroencephalogram. I was trained on polysomnographic interpretation at Stanford. And I know the differences. And the difference between someone that knows how to look at the electroencephalogram, which is a bunch of squiggly lines, and looking for arousals, which is what you need to do to diagnose upper airway resistance syndrome, is much more time consuming, and they don't get paid any more to do it, okay? So, and hopefully, and I know at Stanford and other centers, they're trying to use AI and machine learning to read these electroencephalograms to make it more efficient and not require so many resources. But I think the vast majority of people that are misdiagnosed of not having a sleep disorder after they've gone to a sleep lab, they probably have upper airway resistance syndrome, as I did, misdiagnosed twice. I go to Stanford, they did the polysomnogram for me at Stanford, and my AHI at Stanford was 27. Prior to that, it was 4 at the other one institution, the other one it was 0. So lots of variability. So there are many, many, many areas of improvement. We can improve diagnosis, we can improve public awareness, awareness of the payers, awareness of the government authorities. There is so many opportunities for improvement here, and we have so little resources right now, and we need to divert many more resources. And the main thing is, I think the main thing we can do, the lowest hanging fruit long term, is early intervention and screening of the entire population at an early age. Maybe even near birth, as at this point, maybe with genetic testing or something, or maybe a way to analyze the tongue or the frenulum. But we have to be doing population-based screening. Screening to be effective has to be low cost and sensitive. You don't want what's called a false negative. You want to tell someone, hey, you don't have this disorder. You want to catch everyone that has this disorder. Maybe a few people you say, yeah, you might have it, and if you do like an in-lab study, then like, oh, it's not as bad as we thought. And I think we could do something like a watch path that we could do universally, maybe test everyone every 5 years or something like this. That might be a way, that may be a pathway to go. But ultimately, we're going to get to the point where we're going to take, through this organization, I think we're going to have a huge impact in long term, not very long term. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we may be able to cut the incidence of sleep disordered breathing untreated by half. And I think that'd be a really great goal. And I'm happy, thank you all. I'm happy to take any questions that I might be able to answer or offer any questions to anyone in the facility. Thank you.
Or talk about today? Yep. Anything about today?
It's just a comment, but I've been stuck by this. All day we've been talking about the fact that people who have sleep apnea end up having cognitive problems, just like people who are alcoholics or drug addicts. The difference is that they don't know because they're not doing anything, to get to that point. But, listen to the story of Adam, of Peter, of Brian. It's when they got into an accident, that endangered their lives and lives of others, that suddenly they realized something was wrong. Somebody who is an alcoholic knows he's doing something that, So I think that's something that's maybe obvious, but it's very interesting to me that we're not aware of things that are as bad as you should be able to. We should get like a DUS, driving under sleep deprivation, something like that. I mean, it's and I agree with you. Nobody knows about it, or not enough people.
Right.
A general blanket test should probably be done.
I can tell you that I know GM has technology. Their self-driving technology does detect sleepy drivers, and it's actually very effective. General Motors, yeah. And I think we're going to see more of that. But to address that specific thing, yes. You're right on, absolutely.
That's interesting that you bring that up, Jean-Noel, because a few years ago, and it infuriated some people, but there was going to be a saliva test that policemen could give to drivers that they suspected had not, had any sleep. And the saliva would be able to tell whoever was, checking out the test that they you know, whether they slept, how many hours they hadn't slept. And I don't know whatever happened to that science, but I just thought it was kind of, you know, 1984-ish sort of, but interesting that it could be done with saliva. It was something about interleukin, and I don't remember everything.
That could be, you know, I think most people that have sleep breathing disorders have insomnia and therefore get less sleep, total sleep time, and you could possibly document it with that. That's a good idea for, especially for screening.
I mean, if you are sleepy because you have sleep apnea and you don't realize it, that's one thing. But if you, I mean, I was a sleep tech, and there were many times I tried to drive home in the morning impaired. And I was like, how would that be if a sleep tech, you know, hurt somebody with their car, you know? I used to take many naps in the hospital parking lot just so that I could get over that hump and get home safely. But, you know, sometimes it's not safe to sleep in a car like that either. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Someone over here?
There's another question over here. Okay. Hold on one moment. I have to
Don't be,
Tetris my way over here.
I didn't really understand or hear completely what you said about the watch device that could be used to monitor.
Yes.
Could you give a little bit more explanation of that, please?
yeah, that device is called WatchPat, one word, by a company called Itamar, I-T-A-M-A-R. Again, I have no affiliation whatsoever to disclose with them. I think it's a great device. It's FDA approved, designed and built in Israel, and I think it's a revolutionary device.
We actually have an Itamar representative here, Zohar.
There you go.
We'd be happy to show it to you and let you know.
I'm free for dinner tonight, by the way. Just kidding, just kidding.
Any other questions about the day's topic? Something you want to revisit?
I'm very opinionated. I'll give you an opinion on anything. This is your chance, your last chance.
Yes, you have one? 1 second.
Stereo.
I guess my concern is, like so many medical situations that evolve in our society, that the sleep study that I took was, you know, I am lucky to have good health insurance, but it was well over $3,000.
Yes.
And when you think about the population, the demographics, whatever, and how many people might have sleep apnea, I would hope in the future that that process and that amount of money, I mean, that the whole procedure, the expenditure would be reduced as the technology evolves.
Right.
I mean, you were talking about something that you're wearing on your wrist.
Right.
I mean, I'm hoping someday that we have something like that can be provided to people so that we can diagnose more people. I mean, I probably had sleep apnea all my life, and I was just diagnosed a year ago with severe sleep apnea.
Right.
So it has affected my life.
Right.
I thought I was just getting older, and I would just be exhausted like this for the rest of my life.
Tired, not sleepy, but tired, right?
Tired
Tired,
all the
exactly.
time,
Right,
and,
right.
and I'm on my feet, and I know a lot of people probably experience that.
So when I was mentioning that device, I believe that device is as good or better than the majority of full sleep lab studies, overnight sleep studies. That device, which that costs about $250 to have a study. Maybe I'm about right, maybe it got moved around, but maybe about $250 versus $3,000, yes. And so yeah, the technology is allowing the cost to come down. No question, we'll be able to screen people, the whole population, at relatively low cost. We screen for colon cancer with colonoscopies that cost several $100s, you know?
But let's be clear, we can train every pediatrician, every dentist in the country, every school nurse to look in the airway in about 30 seconds and know right away whether someone needs to actually go have a sleep study. You're looking at, you heard Christine Semenek talk about scalloped tongues, scarred cheeks, bruxism. They look at what they call your Mallampati score, how much room is in the back of your airway, and just those 3 or 4 variables alone should send you in the right pathway and triage to get the best intervention. Yeah. So it's not just about studying, and the field has sort of done a lot about that. We need to make sure we're treating people and that we remove as many of these obstacles and barriers, because if the bed partner witnesses the apnea or the bedwetting for a child or the the night terrors, the sleepwalking, whatever it may be. That's the best objective science measurement because it's witnessed, it's observed,
Yeah.
and the insurers don't care.
Adam, I'd like to add one thing, and segueing from what you said. Orthodontia that makes the mouth smaller, to align your teeth by removing teeth and making it smaller, no one should ever have that done, ever again. The small mouth reduces the volume, and the tongue has only one place to go to block the airway. And I've seen so many people that have had multiple teeth removed to have their teeth straightened, and then they put that retainer on that pulls their teeth back and makes their maxilla smaller. That's the opposite of what you want. You want your mouth to grow during childhood and adolescence. And I've seen so many people that have had that procedure done. I met a woman that had 4 teeth removed, and around age 12, she started developing POTS, postural tachycardia syndrome, which is a comorbid condition, to the point where she became an invalid. And as soon as she went on CPAP, in 2 weeks, she was up and running. It was a night and day difference. And she went back to her orthodontist in Germany, and they denied that any association between doing orthodontia and sleep apnea, which is complete BS, I'm sorry.